Never sleep again.
Are you afraid of the things that go bump in the night? Do you feel like a zombie after a long night of tossing and turning? Well, then try Dream from LifeWise. Just one tab daily before bed will leave you feeling rested and refreshed every morning. That's right, Dream from LifeWise. Just one simple tab placed on your tongue, it dissolves and let you drift into dreamland. Text Moose Dream to 754-600-9473 to get you started with your free samples today.
This is a warning to all living mortals. Moose will release 13 of the most terrifying interviews of horror unto the world.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to another installment of the 13 Horrifying Days of Christmas. I'm your host and gift giver, Moose. Today we're going to dive into a franchise. Not just any franchise, but a sweet franchise. And to do that, that means we need to bring back an old friend. So please welcome back Mr. Billy Peck as we dive into Candyman.
Well, hello there. How many days are we into this thing?
You're number 5. 5 still alive.
In everybody else's hearts, though, I'm number 1. You can't have 13 days without me jumping in here.
Nope. Saying I planned this one specifically for day 5. I ain't going to say his name 5 times, but...
Oh, yeah.
That was a one and done.
As always, excited to be here, doing our franchise deep dives a little bit. And, happy to be here. And it's another year of you celebrating, 13 days of horror for Christmas season.
Yep, a little of this, a little of that, and got a franchise deep dive smack dab in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And, not just a franchise deep dive, but also kind of a tribute to the recently departed Tony Todd.
Yeah.
So, true legend in the industry and, a towering icon in film.
Yeah,
and,
100%.
We'll definitely get more into that here in a bit, but let's get into Candyman, the man, the myth, the legend.
Mm-hmm.
This is a character that started in a short story, The Forbidden, published in a book anthology by Clive Barker. And interestingly enough, it was in volume 5 of the Blood Anthology, Books of the Blood Anthology. I apologize. So there seems to be a running trend here. And, it's from his inception to where we get to Tony Todd in the movie. There's some changes along the way and some casting changes as well. And the things that were originally planned, I'm glad they kind of fell through because I don't see anything. I don't see them working as well and lasting as long as Tony Todd in the role. In that, the character is described as, this kind of Caucasian man with long flowing hair and a bright red beard. And it seems like Fabio.
Well,
like Fabio meets Redbeard. It doesn't have the same appeal.
I mean, if you've seen the picture, there's no Fabio about this guy. This is more like a jaundiced vagrant, with wild, scratchy, stringy hair and so that's what's interesting. Like, books allow you to visualize what it is that you want to see. And it's interesting, for both of us. I'm positive you didn't read the book, and I didn't either. I'm not a book reader. We are the right age, we're there at the right time for the Candyman movies. So that's what we know. It's almost to a certain degree of like, you're, almost giving it an unbiased, or, a bias, but like in like the, not a positive bias towards the book because that's not your Candyman. And it's quite interesting. And it's not a you thing. This is just like
in general. And I mean, we saw the same thing when the new movie was announced and Tony Todd hadn't been announced yet. There was a lot of, that's not my Candyman. This isn't the same movie.
Yeah.
So no, I totally get where you're going with this. It's
yeah, when people are always like, oh, it's not as good as the book, or they changed this or they changed that, with comics or remakes or blah blah blah. It is proof in the pudding that new movies are generational, or new takes are generational, and that is going to be someone's thing. It's just it's an interesting look at things, and like I said, I haven't read the book, but looking at that original sketch drawing, it's so wildly different than the Candyman that we know, and the story it does have similarities, of the things that I've looked into about it. It does have similarities, but the reason why this man is hated, slavery, born out of slavery basically, versus at a lower poverty level of England, and being just looked down on and all of that, so
so it gives it a more tangible, more relatable feel
for a modern audience.
Well, most definitely. Honestly, I think for the modern audience, it's hard to imagine just that, oh, you're cast out, looked down upon feeling. But it's easier to empathize with the plight of being ostracized, with being outcast completely, with being a non-person.
Sure. And really, to me, it's the whole relatable thing. It's in the original Candyman movie, the setting being changed from the dirty streets of London to the rundown slums of Crabini Green in Chicago. It's just an Americanized version.
Yeah.
So the whole relatable thing to me is still that's not as relatable to us because we don't live anywhere around that version of it.
Right.
This is a more Americanized version. And I think, for you specifically, what might feel more relatable for you is because you grew up kind of in those similar kind of neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to say it like you're being narrow-minded, but you have a more narrow look at it because it is specifically relatable to you.
I saw a lot of the same things.
Right. So when you watch this and then years later you end up knowing oh, what? It's this thing and it's more about this, and it's well, yeah, if it was a move, if the roles were reversed, if the book was written about, the ghetto essentially, but it was being made by, English filmmakers for, UK cinema releases, it's the exact opposite.
I can see that.
You know what I mean? So anyway, it's just one of those things Clive Barker is writing more what he knows. Now, Bernard Rose, the director of Candyman, I forget exactly where he's from, and I do find it interesting. I do think, and if I'm wrong here, I can, correct me or whatever, and I could probably look it up real quick, but I don't think he's an American man. So that original story probably relates more to him. But as someone coming in, making an American film and all of that, he knew that changing the story and adding these different elements was going to probably hit differently and
appeal to a much broader audience.
And all of that. It's the early 90s. You have, NWA is a big thing.
So we're right around Rodney King, all this stuff, the LA riots.
So, yes, for our audiences, it is more relatable, and is going to hit on a different level. But, maybe I should or shouldn't get into this, I don't know. But, to be fair, I hate these terms. If this were to happen nowadays, social media would be wild against how this movie turned woke from the original book. Because, well, why do they have to take, our white characters and turn them black? You know what? Guess what? Sometimes just stories work that way, okay? But this is a case where it proves if you just let it, happen and see where it goes, it's a iconic film.
Yeah, iconic.
Most people like.
And it's an iconic franchise at this point. I mean, it's
iconic character.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was cool. And like you said, neither one of us has read the book. But, doing the research for this, one of the things that did carry over from the inspiration for the character was a story that Mr. Barker's grandmother told him.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a cautionary tale when he was 6, about basically don't take candy from strangers. Guy with the hook hand removed the genitals from a young boy. And, we see that in the first movie. So that was really cool to see carry over into the films. But, I also mentioned that there were casting decisions that were made that had they gone the other way, I don't think this would have lasted as well either.
Yes.
And had it been for a bigger budget, we would have had an Eddie Murphy Candyman.
Yeah.
And that's bizarre. I know Eddie Murphy can do serious roles, but I can't picture, and again, this goes from strictly from seeing Tony Todd in this role, Eddie Murphy portraying this character. It doesn't seem, plausible.
Right.
So this is another one of those times where a lower budget worked out great.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It was several aspects that you bring up, Eddie Murphy being in the role. You look at, maybe his version of, not version, but, his take on A Vampire in Brooklyn. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Which that movie's fine. But he is a little more, stoic, reserved. He's not, the foul mouth or, goofy Eddie Murphy that we knew.
And he's not intimidating. And I don't know. And I'm not saying he can't be intimidating. I'm just saying, for me personally,
we've just never really seen it.
Yeah, it's hard for me to picture him as this intimidating person.
Yeah.
And the character needs to have this, suave yet feared demeanor.
Yeah.
And I don't see that with Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, I would he have been able to do it and deliver a performance that we just went, oh wow, we'll never know.
But he might have delivered a solid performance.
What we do know is we got Tony Todd, a big, I don't know, 6'3", 4", tall man. He does have that bigger booming voice that when he does reel it in, and he does talk more.
So he pulls you in.
Like a romanticized, softer voice. It's just a good recipe.
And, so one of the things I found really interesting was what Tony Todd compared the character to in early interviews. And he compares him to like the DC comics Scarecrow,
Yeah.
and then like the Phantom of the Opera and the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes.
So you have this wide range of villainy, and yet victims in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
So he got the character. So not only was he this, big presence, he also understood the heart of the character.
Yeah. I think something that maybe we need to also go over before we start kind of like breaking down movies a little more is like I know for both of us, Candyman is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Means a lot to both of us.
Yep.
And our horror upbringing. So,
well, that was going to be what I asked you next. Do you remember the first time or where you were when you first watched it?
I remember everything about the first time I watched it. So the second movie came out in 95. And so, however long it takes to get to Blockbuster after theaters, was it 95? Was it early 96? Somewhere in there, I would have been, 10, 11 years old. I was at a friend's, like birthday slumber party. So there's like, I don't know, 5, 6 of us, in this old crickety house, like big crickety house, wood floors, the kind of floors that you could see through the cracks in the floor and see the dirt basement below. Just the perfect ambiance for these preteen kids watching, having these movies rented and watching them for the first time. And so we watched the first one, we watched the second one, and a big element that, was brought into the movie that wasn't in the book, and that I think, gives a lot of this character in the movies its legs as well, is the urban legend of Candyman. It's the whole Bloody Mary thing, and saying his name in the mirror 5 times. And us watching the movies, us pretending not to be scared, and in the living room we're watching the movie, and then like to the right is like the bathroom, open door with a mirror, like the sink was like right inside the door, so you could see it. And so we would test our fate, so to speak, and go over and be like, well, I'm not scared, I'll do it, we'll do it. And like, so we all agreed to say Candyman 5 times together while looking in the mirror. And like that 5th time, us like all screaming like little girls and then running and hiding. It was that there are 5 movies that shaped what would get me into being a fan of horror. To not take too much longer on this, but to, give the slightest bit of context, excuse me, is being a kid and enjoying what I would call gateway horror, like Monster Squad or Gremlins, King Kong, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, things of that nature. Like, I liked spooky type things, but when it came to like real horror movies, it was the first 2 Puppet Master movies, it was Tales from the Hood, and it was Candyman 1 and 2. So Candyman will always have a huge part in my life for being, a horror fan and being what got me into it. And, it was the first two Puppet Master movies, kind of a similar situation, being at a friend's house, renting them from Blockbuster, and watching Tales from the Hood all around that same time, and then watching the two Candyman movies. So they were the back half of those 5 movies I saw, and had the bigger impact because of the environment I was in when I watched it, and the scariness of it, and being kids and believing, like, well, what if ghosts are real? What if you actually say this thing in the mirror, and what if it actually happens? The perfect thing for an urban legend. That was the big thing that solidified, this is what I am now.
So, I've talked about it many times before. Universal Monsters got me into horror.
Yeah.
Candyman is the movie of the newer monsters that really locked it in. And it had a different feel about it. Yeah, we had Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th and Halloween and all those that came before it in the 70s and 80s. But there was something about this movie that when you're watching it in the early to mid 90s, as a kid, one, for the most part, it's still kind of taboo. I mentioned this a couple episodes ago when I was sitting down with Zach and we were talking about Blood Diner. It's not like it is with our kids, where it's, oh, you want to watch a horror movie? Okay, go ahead. Depending on age and what the movie is, yeah, sure, go ahead, not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was still very much, if it was rated R, it was an R-rated movie. They were treated almost like X-rated movies. And most parents are like, no, you're not watching it. So, spending the night at my cousin's house.
Mm.
Yes, listeners, same cousin as Blood Diner. And there's like 5 of us in the basement. And it's complete 90s basement. A little like 13-inch RCA TV, VCR, concrete walls, just bare bones. Beat up old couch. But there's 5 of us down there just, we put the movie in, we're watching it, lights off. And the movie's going, and you start to get drawn in with the story and the intrigue. And one of my other cousins happens to come up behind us while we're all just engrossed in this movie and just kind of runs their hand across our shoulders. We all fucking jump. That was it. From then on, I was hooked.
Hooked.
Yeah. I didn't sleep for like 2 nights, but I wanted to watch it again.
Yeah.
And, I tried the mirror thing, never made it past 4. I've said his name 5 times in a mirror, 1 time in my life, and that was recently. But, I was just never quite willing to make that final push.
Yeah.
Which is weird, because I'd do Bloody Mary all the damn time.
Yeah.
I had no problem tempting that fate. but there was something about this character that, no, you could not get me to tempt fate.
Yeah.
And a lot of that goes to the way Tony Todd portrays him. You have this, like, you have the new boogeyman. And, most kids are afraid of the boogeyman.
Yeah.
Well, now this boogeyman has candy and a hook and can disappear, and he can levitate, and he can hypnotize people. And it's not just the monster under your bed. This monster is in your mind. Is he in your mind? Is he not in your mind? Is he real? Is he not real? Mm-hmm. There were so many questions. So, yeah, I was not tempting that at all.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm 38. I've said his 5 times, 1 time in my life. But let's get into the movies.
Yep.
So, first one comes out. It's a breath of fresh air for horror in theaters, which is kind of what I was talking about a little bit there with, the new monsters and how they were, the new horror and how they were coming about. Because, this is around the same time, you're getting Leprechaun, you're getting, you're getting all these other new guys, the new generation of monsters.
Yeah. You're looking at we'll call it, Gen 1 of the new monsters, Michael, Freddy, Leatherface, Jason, all of that. That, like you already kind of mentioned them, late 70s, early 80s. Now we're moving into late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, you're by this point, you're getting like you said, Leprechaun and Chucky and these, I feel like they're all more product of Freddy. Freddy,
the wise mouth,
the wisecracking. Freddy even became, a parody of himself, so to speak. Then you got, Chucky, wisecracking, Leprechaun wise, it's, so all at that same time. Now you're getting Candyman, and he's not that at all. We get a character that does speak, but it's not trying to be this silly thing.
No, he's very serious, very poignant.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very much a when he talks, you listen character.
Yeah.
Because when he only talks when he has something to say. Ultimately, throughout this whole franchise, this is a franchise about, at its heart, this is a franchise about love.
Yes.
And that's, that's what's laid out through the first movie is, you get the story of Daniel Robitaille, this son of a slave who becomes this world-class painter.
Yes.
And is commissioned to paint this, I don't know, plantation owner's daughter, this colonel's daughter. Let's just, this white rich guy's daughter.
Yes.
And, they fall in love and they commence to what you do after you fall in love. And Dad found out and wasn't happy about it and hires thugs to take care of it.
Yeah.
In probably one of the most gruesome origin stories I can think of.
Sure.
He gets his hand sawn off, smothered in honey. And as we find out, depending on which version of the origin story you listen to, it's either tied to a tree, tied to a stump, kind of hung from a tree, which I have a theory on all of those. I think it's the origin story just says tree and it just changes in the course of the mythos.
Well, and it's, that's one of those things of like, it's the legend of something. This is all stuff that, like, do you think this was, properly recorded history or tales that have been passed down over
some
the
guy
years?
Just sitting there writing, and then his hand was sawn from his body and covered in honey.
Right.
And here come the bees. Shit, bees.
Again, that's what makes it urban legend.
And, like I said, it's probably one of the most horrific origin stories of really most of the monster pantheon.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, too, is like, he wasn't a slave. He was, raised, like you said, a very, smart, educated, renowned human. Like, yes, he came, like so I said earlier, almost born, out of slavery, but, he surpassed that. And again, was hired, to do this job. They could have hired anyone, that's who they hired. So like the fact that like it, you still had that racism though, and the people who still believe there should be slaves and all of that. So you get, what happens to him. Again, it just adds to that gruesomeness of it.
Right. To say, because, that took place just right after the Civil War. So that was all still very fresh.
Yes.
Then, we fast forward to the 90s, which at the time, modern era. And, we're with a young Helen Kyle, this aspiring student who becomes enthralled with the legend and wants to dig deeper into Cabrini Green and the myth and either prove it or debunk it or, just see what there is to it.
Yeah.
And that's where our story really starts to kick off. And that's where we kind of start to see is he real or is he just a figment of people's imagination?
Mm-hmm.
Because throughout this whole movie, she's almost the only person that can see him. Everyone knows about him.
Yeah. Well, and that's because she is the one that doesn't believe it. So his whole thing, it's the story of what Freddy became later, or what Michael became in the most recent movies. You start to forget who it is, you basically take away their power. So, that was Candyman, and she was like essentially trying to debunk it, that it wasn't real. And so he presented himself to her.
Every time he's summoned in the movie, it always kind of starts as a joke.
Yes.
And similar to like when, you tried it as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's, well, should we? Yeah, why not? So what starts as a joke backfires drastically. Yeah. And in her search for answers, there's this wake. She leaves this trail of bodies in her wake.
Yeah.
That she keeps getting blamed for.
Yes.
Because there's no other logical explanation. From a dead Rottweiler to a missing baby to, just the body count and blood just that gets attributed to her.
Yep.
Is insane. All because, and rightfully so. Even when she's in the psychiatric hospital on camera, she looks like she's absolutely batshit crazy.
Yeah.
Talking to herself and freaking out over nothing because there's, as far as anyone can tell, nobody in the room.
Yeah.
She loses everything. Loses her husband, loses, everything she held dear, and that was 100% his design.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the movie, she rescues the baby at the cost of her own life.
Yes.
That's always been an interesting scene because you have, he wants to sacrifice the baby and Helen.
Yeah.
And that's not something that has really happened up to this point either. Kids were kind of off limits. Now the kid still makes it, but
right.
Up till this point, kids were still pretty much, you don't do it. And if you do it, it's off camera.
Sure.
But here you have this baby in right in the center of a huge bonfire. That was pretty groundbreaking for the time and movies.
Yeah.
And she, Helen redeems herself with the residents of Cabrini Green when she hands the baby out. She crawls out of that fire, hands the baby to the mom, and she looks like Anakin Skywalker at the end of Star Wars.
Yeah. And
she dies.
Yeah.
Either from shock or from the burns or a combination of both. She just dies. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
She starts to have a very sad funeral. It's her now ex-husband and his mistress.
Yeah.
And then all of Cabrini Green shows up.
Yeah.
To drop the hook into the ground with her. And that was the thing. He was trying to take her with him, make her part of the legend.
Yeah.
And
well, and also, maybe some similarities in look to his mistress.
Yep,
not even mistress, to the woman that
his lover.
Yeah, fell in love with.
And it was hinted at heavily that, Helen looked like Caroline.
Yeah.
And, like I said, this is a very gory love story is what this franchise is.
Yeah.
This is a man who wants revenge and love. And the one thing I wish we could have gotten more from, and maybe even like a spinoff or maybe something down the road, is at the end of the movie, you see the distraught ex-husband sitting in the bathroom.
Right.
He looks in the mirror and he says Helen's name 3 times. And there's this Helen, burn victim Helen.
Yeah.
Pops up and just eviscerates him. So she became part of the legend. She got to essentially become part of the lore that she spent so much time trying to debunk. And also has this new, Bloody Mary vibe.
Yes.
And I just, personally, I think it would be cool to see more from, something more from that character.
Which is what part 2 was supposed to have. But it would, if I remember what I read correctly, was that it would go more into that. Okay, so hold on. I think there was a couple things. I think one was supposed to follow her, and maybe it was like a mix. I might be kind of mixing things up now. It might have was maybe supposed to be a prequel. It might have just supposed to have been like kind of both coming together. But the problem is, and again, where, society, kind of dictates, especially at that time, the studio was too afraid to showcase like a full-on mixed race relationship. And they just scrapped it. Because like you see hints of it, but this would have been essentially like a whole movie of it. And they decided not to go that route.
So we could have had this murderous power couple.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and I'm sure there's more to it. I just know that was kind of like the reason behind why it did not move forward.
But instead, for 2, we move out of Chicago.
Yes.
To Louisiana.
Yes.
Just in time for Mardi Gras.
Yep.
For the birthplace of Daniel Robitaille.
Yeah.
This was a fun one. Now, on the rewatch, and I mentioned this to you before, I remembered more about this movie than I thought I did. Because like when I was setting up for this, I'm like, man, I don't remember 2 and 3 at all.
Yeah.
But then I was watching, I was like, oh crap, no, I actually remember more about 2 than I thought.
Right. At this point, like throughout the years, I've watched the first one way more than the others. But as like I visualize Candyman, like, and again, it's just because of how I watched them. 1 and 2 are kind of seared together for me. So like, I'll like think of things that I'm like, oh, that's from the first one, but it's actually from the second, and vice versa. So
I get 2 and 3 mixed up a lot. 2 were introduced ultimately to his family.
Yeah.
Which is a really cool development. And it let me take that back. His family is kind of split 2 ways. So there's the main girl who would be his great granddaughter?
I think just great granddaughter.
Yeah, great granddaughter. And then her brother be his great grandson.
Yes.
Now he gets, he gets accused of the murders early in the movie.
Yes.
And
well, yeah, go ahead. You're on a path here.
Ultimately gets locked up for it.
Yeah.
By very biased cop.
So part of the problem is the brother. The movie starts with the same professor from the first movie.
On a book tour.
Trying to like, he's capitalizing off of, like
he's Dr. Loomising it up.
Yes, from Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, the book tour, and he, was, when in the first movie where Helen, didn't necessarily believe it, but like you could tell she like cared in the project that she was on, the integrity of essentially like, the story, that she wanted to tell, where he was more like this big boisterous blowhard. And so he now is on this book tour, and the book is actually kind of cool, and it'd be neat to get like a reproduction of it, because it's like the chrome dust jacket to emulate a mirror with a hook on it and stuff. It's like, oh, that would actually be kind of neat to have. But so he, does not believe in it. It is not real, and does the whole stunt of like, the reporters in the crowd or the fans are just like, oh yeah, well, say his name. And he does. But then, the joke happens and comes through the mirror, or through the, it's not actually the mirror, it's the projector screen. But So yeah, then the brother, he afterwards like sees him on the streets of New Orleans, and he believes that his father was killed by Candyman.
And is on a mission to prove it.
Yes.
Without telling his sister to spare her.
Yeah.
Which ultimately backfires.
Yeah. But I think that part, like, that context was kind of important to, you know, the chronology, so to speak, of the films, and, you know, why
he's the one that, the professor is the one that invokes him in the movie.
Right.
And one of the things I really liked about this movie, and where it kind of falls in the time frame, is, you know, you have brother who's locked up for murders he didn't commit. You have sister under investigation for murders she hasn't committed. It's all been Candyman.
Mm-hmm.
One cop who's hell-bent on proving it's his family, because he knows people like them, looking down on everybody from their house on the hill. And you know, I've said before that one of the marks of a good movie is characters to root for, whether you root for him to die or you root for him to survive. Yeah, this was a cop. You know, this cop was a character you wanted to die. You couldn't wait for him to go. Yeah. And so,
because he does the Candyman thing too.
And when he does, he gets annihilated, thrown through a window, all of it. Mm-hmm. And the brother's freaking out, and it's all caught on camera. Yeah. Now, Candyman's not, but you have this cop levitating in the air with getting his insides ripped out and slammed up against the wall, and just all this happening for again no logical reason, and the brother's cowering in the corner. Yeah. Ultimately, brother's scared, runs away, gets shot for trying to escape. Mm-hmm. Which sucks, because had he not been scared, he probably would have survived. Sure. But I don't know what else you would do in a situation like that. Yeah. And as the movie's progressing, the sisters finding out that they are the blood of Daniel Robitaille. They are the descendants of him and Caroline's daughter Isabel. Yeah. And that's why they're so heavily tied to this myth and to everything that's happening. Mm-hmm. And so she starts trying to find out what her dad was after, and finds out that it comes down to a mirror. Yeah. You have to destroy this mirror. It holds his soul, his essence, because it witnessed the terror. And where do they find this mirror? His birthplace, the slave quarters behind I guess the house she grew up in, essentially. Yeah. That is a scary looking place. Mm-hmm. I mean, just full of bones, and just, I would imagine it's reeked of death. Sure. And she gets the mirror. And this is where the Robitaille charm comes in. He almost has her convinced not to destroy it. Yeah. And that's, as a kid, even as an adult, that's still one of the scariest things about him, is that, is his charm. Yeah. This is what you have to do. This is what you want to do, but he's got a silver tongue. He can talk you out of it. Yeah. And he's going to do everything especially in this case, he's going to do everything he can to make sure you do what he wants, not what you want. Mm-hmm. And, ultimately it doesn't work. She breaks the mirror and he's dead. Yeah. Little bit of a time jump. She has a daughter. Yeah. And daughter's like 2 or 3, sitting in her bed. Got it. Yeah. And they're going through a family album, and, goes through all the pictures, and they see the picture of, Caroline and Isabella, and then there's the picture of Daniel Robitaille, and says that's your great-great-grandfather. Mm-hmm. And someday when you're older, I'll tell you a story about him. Yeah. No, apparently this kid already knows the story, because she starts to invoke the name into this mirrored mobile above her bed, which blows my mind, considering, yeah, I mean, everything that the mom knows. Why in the hell would you put mirrors over the kid's bed with the, almost gothic paint job around the room?
Yeah.
It was like a Tim Burton-esque paint job in that bedroom. And you're still going to get it. Here, let's get a kid who's related to the boogeyman. Mirrors. But mom stops her in time.
Well, that's one of those things that the general going movie audience, don't, they won't notice. They won't think about that. And when that movie came out, I certainly
didn't think about it either, yeah. But then, 25-year jump.
Yeah.
And we're following Caroline.
Yes.
25 years and a coastal jump. We're no longer in Louisiana. We're out in LA.
Yes.
Different LA.
And so here, now let me say this. This is one of the things that I did appreciate about each movie so far, is that they take place in different places.
Mm-hmm.
The Cabrini Green, is in a sense, it's part of Candyman's origin, so that's why he's there, and murders and all of this and blame and whatever. So it being there makes sense, but an urban legend and a ghost, so to speak, of this kind of nature can be anywhere.
Well, and the shifting locations touches on something laid out in the next film. So right. It's each of these movies adds something else to the lore, to the mythos, to this grandiose story that's been told through time.
Yeah.
And it makes it a bigger story.
Yes.
And it continues to grow and evolve, and it's no longer just a story. This is a living thing at this point.
Yes. And let me say this as well. Third movie, not so great.
Well, that'd probably be why it went straight to home video.
We've kind of glossed over, like how good or bad the movies are. And the third one is, it came out in 99. We are just in a not the greatest era of horror films. The 90s gets a lot of flack in general, and rightfully so. Scream came out in 96, and then everything else was like, well, let's make everything like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and we focus more on attractive people and all this, meta and all this stuff. Scream might have saved horror, but it certainly didn't like course correct it completely either. And that's why we get, 1999 Candyman.
Well, and no matter when you watch this now, you can tell it was late 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the sex and the nudity is driven way up from the original two. And, it is very much right there at the cusp of the new millennium.
Yeah.
It screams home video release. Had it come out a few years later, this would have been a Sci-Fi Channel movie.
Yeah. Unfortunately at this point, it's just like with any horror film that is a franchise at this point, each movie gets a smaller budget each time. And especially now by this third one, and there's a lot of years in between, comparatively, some of these movies we're getting them like every maybe 2 years. This is it's 3-4 years.
It says 3 between the first.
Yeah. Which again, it's not like that long of a time, but it's just.
But in the 90s and film, that's.
Yeah.
Now 3 years goes by in the blink of an eye with social media and people just constantly updating you on things.
Yeah.
But pre-social media, 3 years felt like a lifetime. Hell, 1 year felt like a lifetime.
Right. And it's, again, is it super long? No. But for filmmaking like this, it's even less effort is being put into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of more where I'm going with it.
Oh, yeah.
So it's even more they really were just like, hey, let's put this thing out.
I say 3 was very basic. takes place around Day of the Dead.
Yeah. Which again, neat thought, neat concept.
Everything about this movie, give it a better budget, and it could have been a home run.
Yeah. And you've got like, Donna DeErico, she's, off of like Baywatch fame and, trying to like get a career. It's almost like a more like a vehicle to like, oh, well, let's try and push her, and
it's like they wanted Tara Reid, but couldn't get her.
So yeah, it's just, little more care going into it. It could have been okay.
Yeah. I mean, you get, like I said, we're following her character of Caroline, and she's, she owns the family portraits.
Yes.
And wants to put on an exhibit.
And she wants to take it serious.
Yeah. She doesn't want the urban legend story. She wants to tell the Daniel Robitaille story. Mm-hmm. The story about the man, not the legend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the
promoter, so to speak, he has no interest in that.
He needs a gimmick.
Yeah.
And, so his gimmick is he leans into the legend. He even hires an actor to be a fanatic.
Yeah.
And, basically attack the event, who ultimately becomes the number one suspect for the movie by a very racist cop.
Yeah.
And again, product of the 90s. Overly racist cop. And I'm not saying racist cops are gone, but just the way it was portrayed.
Yeah.
Just woof. And bodies start dropping. And, as we follow through, we start to dabble in magic. And, we find out that the bad can't exist without the good.
Mm-hmm.
You have to destroy the good to destroy the bad. Now, my first watch through, as the abuela is saying this, all I could figure, I'm thinking is crap, Caroline has to die. Because that's the last remaining good. She's the last of the bloodline. Kill the bloodline, kill the story. That's not it at all. What's his good? His legacy, his paintings, his artwork. The same thing she was trying to promote.
Mm-hmm.
So to end this man, she has to destroy his greatest creations. And she does. And in the process, bye-bye Candyman.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to say about the Re.
No,
it's fun.
It pushes more of the story of his origin. Each one gets a little bit further into that, and so we get to see how much art meant to him, which I think is important moving forward. He said we get to see a little bit more of the relationship, and this time is we're right on the verge of a Tony Todd sex scene.
Yeah.
The actress playing, that Caroline, nudity.
She was, like you said, she was mid coitus, and then boom, Tony Todd.
Right, like you said, with the time frame of this movie coming out, they're really trying to push a little bit more of the sexuality, which it's fine. That's what adults do, but when, and I don't know if I can quite portray this the right way to, whatever. If they would have shown this in the original Candyman, the romanticism would have been done, it would have felt even more romantic and tasteful. Not that it's overly gratuitous or anything like that in this, but it's they're trying to push those boundaries.
It would have been more romance, less sex.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway.
And then we move into the newest movie.
Yes.
Which, less of a time jump from the third one, but huge time jump from the first one into a direct sequel to Cabrini Green, and we're back in Chicago.
Yes.
And we're introduced to this young artist who's looking for his next breakthrough project.
Mm-hmm.
And he's supposed to be setting up this show, and the gallery owner said, you're not giving me the same thing that you gave me before. You don't have that fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he learns about Candyman and Helen Kyle and all the things that happened at Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
And
so here's the other thing about Cabrini Green is it was the ghetto. It was the slums.
It's not no mo.
Correct. It was a place built for extremely low income people and then was not cared for. That's just, how certain areas are. They even talk about it in the movie. Again, look.
So they even talk about it in the first movie.
Well, sure. Yes, but like it's it's such a weird thing to like go over these days, because you always got people on either side like taking it to another step that it doesn't need to be. But look, at the end of the day, Candyman movies are based on, racial stories.
And again, in this one, and I think in the first one is mentioned that, hell, even maybe in the third one, it's mentioned that, wherever people are having hardship and social injustice, rather.
Yeah.
He will be there.
Yeah.
So it's, as long as there's injustice, this legend's not going anywhere.
Right.
And,
So,
when I was saying that, they mentioned in the first movie and tying it to this one, you had Cabrini Green, and then you had Helen's building.
Yeah.
And that was essentially still built as the projects. But they realized there wasn't that barrier between the projects and the middle class.
Yeah.
So they slapped a coat of paint on it and made that the barrier.
Yeah. And so like in the new one, they talk about how like, white people, built Cabrini Green to give the low class, a place to stay and forget about them. And then they realized, oh, well, this looks like garbage. There's
So
like
now we
all
gotta
this
move 'em out.
crime. Now, so the same white people, so to speak, gentrified it.
It was gentrified.
They went through the gentrification and
the
made
hipsters
into
moved
this. Right. Moving the low class out again.
Yep.
And again, I feel like your listeners would, are they get it. They get what this is all about. Like, not trying to like turn this into some big thing. It's just, that's just the way society is sometimes. And that's what part of this movie is pushing, and part of how Candyman comes to be.
Well, I mean, this whole franchise is based around, racial injustice. And so, you move it into, this one's set modern era,
Yes.
So, you're going to touch on gentrification and police brutality and everything that this movie hit on, that they absolutely had to touch on it. And they nailed it. I don't think it was overdone. I don't think it was underdone. It's just
talking about the truths of what goes on.
Like we mentioned, each movie adds a little bit more to the myth. And what we see in this one is we go back in time to the 70s. We get a guy with an actual hook hand.
Yes.
A actual prosthetic hand. Who gives out candy, who hides in the walls. And is, known as the Candyman, and he gets beaten to death by the cops.
Yeah.
In front of this little kid.
Yeah.
Ultimately, later we see this, kid set the main character up to take the fall. And I think a lot of that falls from maybe some internal guilt, because had he not yelled, the guy might have not been beaten to death.
Yeah.
So I think there might have been an internal conflict most of his life of, I'm responsible for his death. the main character has a very interesting story arc that unfolds.
Yes.
Which
goes along with a lot of modern storytelling, filmmaking in today's age.
I see
and it can either go kind of one of two ways, and I think this goes.
I say they nailed it with this one.
Yep.
This is a legacy movie.
Yes.
It's about halfway through the movie. He's in the hospital getting his hand checked out, and
because he gets stung by a bee.
Yep. And
because he's an artist. He's an artist that gets stung by a bee.
Yep, crazy. And he finds out he was born at Cabrini Memorial. He's like, no, I was from the South Side. And the nurse is like, no, it says here you were born right here. And he goes to ask his mom about it, who we haven't seen up until this point. She's been mentioned a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And we go see Mom, and it's the lady from the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
Who lost her baby.
Mm-hmm.
And big reveal, our main character is the baby from the fire. And she moved out of Cabrini to give him a normal life.
Right.
And unfortunately, the curse still caught up to him. And he seemed almost destined to have this fate. Because like you said, he's an artist. He met with the bee. He lives in the gentrified Cabrini area. He is a young black man in the modern era. There's a lot lining him up for the parallels to Daniel Robitaille. And, ultimately he gets set up as he's losing his marbles.
Yeah.
By the kid who witnessed the guy with the prosthetic as the new Candyman. And, he's out, he's kind of drugged out of his mind. He's out in the projects after the kid, well, now adult, shoves a hook into his arm, straps it in, calls the cops and says, the Candyman's out in the ghetto and he's killed a couple people and the police swarm. And now the girlfriend of the guy, new Candyman, kills the, I guess, bad guy? Because he's not really a bad guy. He's not really a good guy.
Yeah.
Then Candyman's just kind of laying there on the floor. Cops come in and shoot him.
Yeah.
Shoot him and kill him. And this is, this goes to the, modern era thing. You have the girlfriend sitting in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And the cop basically telling her this can go one or two ways. You could tell us, your story could be that, essentially you're going to help us cover our ass and that he came up and we shot him to, protect ourselves and we didn't just shoot an unarmed guy. Or you're an accomplice and you're going to jail.
Yeah.
And she does the only thing that she can think of.
Mm-hmm.
And she invokes the name of Candyman. And I'm watching this. Pause the movie. And I had a tear. I was like, that doesn't work. I tried. And my wife asked what I was talking about. I was like, and like I mentioned earlier, one time in my life, I've, said his name 5 times in a mirror, and that was right after Tony Todd died.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work. He didn't come back. In the movie, it did.
Right.
Anthony comes back.
Yes.
And starts taking out all these cops.
Yes.
And you see him kind of transform into finally the reveal of Tony Todd.
Yes.
And, it's tell my story.
Tell every.
And, that's the end of it. But this movie added something really cool to the myth. And that's anybody could be a Candyman.
Well, and I mean, it certainly expands it more, but that's what the first movie does. Helen essentially becomes a Candyman, the Candy Woman,
But it also shows that this has been going on for years.
Yes.
That, essentially other people have picked up the mantle of Candyman.
Yes.
And so when you look back at the movies and we're bouncing from, Los Angeles to LA, and all these other places, it does make you wonder, okay, where else are there Candyman slayings?
Mm-hmm.
Because like you're looking at like, so in the credits, there's I don't know what it's called, but like the paper puppet show. And they're showing essentially Candyman and people that became Candyman.
Well, right, and that's something I wanted to talk about more too. Was these paper shadow puppets, which in doing a little bit of research, and I don't know a lot of the story, but this was a thing, an art style that was used during like slave days and stuff. So that's just including more history. And then some of the stories that were told were through the puppetry were real stories. There was a black man that was tied to the back of a car and dragged till his death. There was another one, but they're them telling the stories of these things, are basically, they're taking these again, real world problems that have happened and basically turning them into like, these can be Candyman.
Which then opens the world up more. Obviously, this is when the movie came out. The very first thing I thought was, I want more.
Right.
Like a series or something, like each episode dedicated to each of the Candymen would be kind of cool.
Right. And so like, it's smart, is it the exact thing they were going for? Look, and something we haven't talked about at all, is this started as a Jordan Peele project. Was set to direct, decided to hand those duties off. I think her name's Nia DaCosta. So he stayed on as a producer and he helped in fleshing out the script. With anything nowadays, I suppose he could be considered a polarizing filmmaker, but at the end of the day, he is a very strong, established filmmaker, putting out interesting stories. And so the reason why I say all that is to say he, and the people involved, I think goal number one is putting out a good, strong film. After that, are there nuggets, breadcrumbs placed in to potentially lay groundwork for future, projects within the land of Candyman, sequels of a television series, just like what you're saying, either version of that could very much work in an anthology style. Do we keep following Anthony McCoy, now as the Candyman, or do we follow other stories of the Candyman mythos and other people? Do we see what was the other Candyman? Sherman, thank you. Yeah, Sherman Fields. Do we follow that story a little bit more? In the 70s, imagine us watching a 70s setting movie, or episode.
Yeah.
It will we see that? As far as I recall, haven't really heard anything about an upcoming, like, oh, hey, that movie did pretty well, we're thinking about a second, or I don't recall hearing anything like that.
But boy, is it fun to dream.
But is it fun to dream? Yes. Is that, it would be interesting to see where that kind of stuff could go. An episode, obviously, like, she's older now, but with the miracle of prosthetics and makeup and de-aging and all of that, and she's not, going to look exactly the same. because of the burn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, could we get a Helen Candyman episode, you know, or now again, this is stuff I think would work more episodically.
Yeah.
Than a full-on movie. But man, how cool could something like that be?
Right. Who knows what the future holds? And with that, we'll put this legend to bed. Billy, why don't you tell them where they can find you on the social medias?
All right. You can check out a couple projects that I'm part of. You're here because you love horror. I love horror. He loves horror. She loves horror. We're all a bunch of horror.
We're horrors.
Yes, I have a horror punk themed band called Graveyard Smash, very along the same lines as like the Misfits, songs about Amityville horror, vampires, all of the things. Graveyard Smash, available on Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, Bandcamp, or social media. Be Graveyard Smash 13. And if you want to check out other podcasting ventures, you can check out my wrestling collectible related podcast, Major World Order, where we interview people within the wrestling business or fans and their collecting habits. And then lastly, if you want to hear Moose and me and myself talk more about different things within pop culture, a very select section of pop culture, Zoobly Zoo, with one of its stars, Michael B. Moynihan, who played Lookout Bear. If you don't know what Zoobly Zoo is, just go to YouTube, look up Zoobly Zoo theme song. That'll be the exact thing that you need to hear.
If you thought it was a fever dream, you were wrong.
If you thought it was something you forgot it was a dream, never heard of, maybe want your own different version of Nightmare Fuel, as some people will call it, check out Zoobly Zoo podcast. There you go. Just some different things that I'm part of. And if not, you're checking those out, I'll be right back here on Moose's Monster Mash for another deep dive in the future.
Absolutely. And listeners, those links will be in the episode description. You can find me and other great podcasters over at electronicmediacollective.com. Be sure to follow me on Facebook at Moose's Monster Mash and on YouTube at Moose Media Inc. Billy, as always, this has been fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, just want to say, may Mr. Todd rest in peace. Like I said at the beginning, a true icon in the industry.
Yeah.
And our Candyman forever.
Yeah, 100%. Always interested in seeing, where the Candyman franchise can go. But, Tony Todd is the man, and a very unfortunate loss. And, maybe there was a portion of this that could have been, maybe a little more dedicated to him specifically in other projects. But, if you're horror fans, you've watched his other stuff. If not, let me at least just say, I'm a real big fan of Adam Green, who did the Hatchet films that Tony Todd, his part grew per movie. It's awesome seeing him in those. And then Adam Green and other horror director Joe Lynch have a TV series called Holliston that hopefully you can find. But Tony Todd has a great episode where he is playing essentially a parody of himself. And, he's this big Hollywood star, and he, just call me Candyman. So just a couple things to look into in his vast array of cinema that he's been part of. And thanks, Tony Todd.
Yeah. And listeners, come back tomorrow for another installment of the 13 Horrifying Days of Christmas. And, if you're feeling lucky, grab yourself a mirror, say his name, and he'll appear. And until next time, Horror Hounds, mash on.
Say his name and he appears.
This has been Moose's Monster Mash. Come back for more chills and thrills if you dare.